Our opening words are adapted from Catherine Hawker Self. Come burdened, come savvy, come aging, come discouraged, come wanting, come full, come longing, come drifting, come. Founding member of this congregation, for which we are all very grateful to you, Betty. Betty was a columnist, continues to be a wise guide for life to many of us, an author, and I would say humanities scholar. Welcome, Betty Mills.
I've been promoted. One of the privileges of standing up in the pulpit is that you can change your mind about what you're going to say and do. So I am substituting a reading for instead of as scheduled in your bulletin. This one is from Eventide by Elizabeth Tarbox. And it says, the title is There Have Been Septembers. Whatever September means to you, bring it here and let it find a place in your belongings. Those of you who dressed your child for the first day of school this week, welcome to September. You who readied the summer cottage for winter, welcome to September. You who tidied your desk, brought in the hanging plants off the porch, resealed your driveway, met a whole new class of children, welcome to September. Those of you whose memories of summer will be smoothed into the pages of a photograph album, those whose memories will line your forehead or tear your heart, welcome to September. Those who carried a school bag for the first time, loved someone, said goodbye, cried some, cried a lot, welcome to September. September has marked the best and worst times for me. There were new belongings, my sister's birthday, my wedding day, but September makes me nostalgic. It's the smell of school and shyness and the memory of a friend who died and the way my clothes don't fit and worry about the year ahead. Thank you, September, for bringing us all together to smile at each other, hug, maybe touch hands, join voices again. Hang around a while, give us warm autumn afternoons before we have to shake our sweaters out of the summer hiding or mend the broken zipper on the windproof jacket. Spirit of love and reunion, bless our house and our hours together. Help us to feel the possibility of joy in this place and friendship and beginnings. Then I have two more. Well, this one is by the Minister Jane Ramney Rzepka. Those of you who get the Church Across the Street bulletins, she has a column in it every week. This one is called Along for the Ride. We Unitarian Universalists like to guide ourselves through life and its ultimate questions, to build our own theologies. We love the search, our individual quests. Every person in the pew decides about the divine, the nature of evil, and everything in between. It's a lot of work, but I always thought brought the approach hook, line, and sinker. Until last week when we went whitewater rafting. They gave me a paddle. I could handle that. They gave me a wetsuit. I got that on. They gave me a life jacket. I got that buckled up. They put a bright blue helmet on my head, showed me how to paddle, and put me in a raft in the Kennebec. With a little practice, with all my attention and strength, I learned to follow the guide's commands. I stopped sliding around, paddled hard, and when I had the chance, bailed. The guide began to shout details about the water's configuration and possible approaches to each rapid. I was slow to understand that she expected us novices to take turns as guides. I could cope with the cold, the wind, the rain. I didn't tire. I didn't conk anybody with my paddle. Simply shoeless camping in the woods along the bank was fine. Worrying about the children was survivable. And I loved the rapids, even the scary ones. But that was my limit. On the river, I was along for the ride. I didn't want a guide. At times in life, the water is choppy. The drops are sharp, and we're shivering hard and paddling fast. We can't always be our own guides. Sometimes it's enough to just sit in there along for the ride. And then I have one more. It's called General Assembly, day 2. And for those of you that aren't into Unitarian jargon, the General Assembly is the annual meeting of the denomination. I only cried once today, different than yesterday when it was twice. Different today because I wasn't just moved, I was embraced. You've got to get this. I'm this old white guy. Racist, of course, I'm an American. Sexist, of course, I'm a man. And this was by a young black woman. If we were both black in Zimbabwe or somewhere, both white in Norway or somewhere, it'd be like normal between neighbors. But this is this crazy mess we call America, where the walls are so steep and the hurt is so deep, we can't even say hello. Instead, we share past one another for 1,000 years. So that's why the crying. Mine held back 200 years. Hers, even if she didn't let it go tonight, probably held back twice as long. Choice matters. How we see one another, how we say one another. The space that gets created here is sacred. Has to be. Has to be. Do you know what it's like to walk down a hallway and greet someone across the rape of slavery? Do you know how much forgiveness it takes to say yes? I do see the sacred in you. I am safe enough here that I can. And now what matters more is that we've got to grow this thing. We've got to be safe. We can't just feel safe a couple days a year and with just a few people. Small won't do. Talk to me when you've got 10,000 neighbors you want me to meet. I'm ready, and you can meet mine. This used to be the first Sunday of the new year, the Sunday after Labor Day, which gave us the opening to say, if questioned about skipping the summer in our church, that we were the only ones God trusted to take the summer off. Okay, I only used that with other Unitarians and understanding others, having eventually discovered that smart remarks did not necessarily improve the image of the church. But then I'm not fond of the phrase, the image of the church, which sounds too much as if what we really need is a good advertising campaign. Over the long years that I've been in this church, we've spent time talking about church needs. Updated bathrooms, more chairs, air conditioning, the to-do list. Those are perfectly legitimate conversations for a church. Sometimes if we don't handle those conversations with tenderness, they can be first-class downers for the church life. So we should treat such conversations with respect, which is different than single-minded obsession. Once upon a time, we had a president of this fellowship, and Helen will remember him, who was a devout neatnik. And I think sometimes some mornings in the church were more an ordeal and an inspiration for him. He muttered, and we usually shaped up. Just the same, one of my favorite memories of Herman and the church was during our fall house cleaning, as we got ready to start services. Sort and save, sort and throw, scrub and clean and wax and vacuum. The usual. I happened to be on the window washing detail one fall during the Herman Weck presidency, and that meant in this room, step stools, the whole thing. Long handles, lots of elbow grease, but we did it. We could see the Capitol with no impending debris on the windows. The window washing committee leaned back and smiled, and Herman showed up. Look at those windows, he said, and we smiled. You call that clean? You better get busy. His wife, standing behind me, looked at me and grinned and said confidentially into my ear, Herman's not German for nothing. We washed the windows again. Personally, I think the nitty-gritty in the church can be a lot of fun and a good way to get to know each other on a sort of non-intimidating level, even when the Hermans are in charge. But this morning, I want to talk about what the church gives us, should give us, what we can give back to the church, and perhaps more importantly, to the world. Among my collection of words to remember, those irregular shaped clippings, the coffee-stained memorabilia, I sometimes find something that seems relevant for the time, like this one by Rob Bresney entitled Painful Blessings. We need truth in their wild state, insurrectional beauty that excites our curiosity, outrageous goodness that drives us to perform heroic acts of lusty compassion, ingenious love that endlessly transforms us, tricky freedom that is never permanent, but that must be reinvented and reclaimed every day. and a totally serious yet always laughing justice that schemes and dreams about how to diminish the suffering and increase the joy of every sentient being. So I'm radically curious, my fellow creators. I'm seriously delirious, since we are in charge of making a brand new world. Where do we begin? What truths in their wild state are we planning to plant at the heart of creation? Well, religion, of course, is an individual matter, and each of us has our own unique story to tell. And the Sundays when individuals tell us their personal account of how they got here are a vital part of this congregation. I, of course, have been telling my story for years and years, and so in bits and pieces you may know a lot about my journey. And then if a little repetition creeps in this morning, you can always sort of space me out for the duration. My story begins with the history of this fellowship because that's how I found my true religious home. The Unitarians and the Universalists were still separate denominations way back then, and the fellowship movement originated with the Unitarians about 5 years before we, this fellowship, became part of that group. A minister I knew once told me that I usually referred to myself as a Unitarian because the fellowship movement was the Unitarians' idea. But he said, don't kid yourself. In your gut, you're a Universalist. I puzzled over his contention for years and finally filed it under one of those great mysteries of life. Now, I don't think such a decision would even make the recycle bin. What I really love about Unitarian Universalism is that it never lets me off the hook, does not consent to let me skip the hard parts, drift around the vital questions, accept ignorance as excusable, turn my back on the world, take me where I didn't know I needed to go. That those imperatives may be implied rather than out loud does not grant me amnesty. That I had a particular long way to go from given where and when I was born may be an explanation, but it's not necessarily excusable. For instance, though, women had only had the vote for 5 years the year I was born. In many colleges, many law and medical schools would not admit women. And in the area of North Dakota where I grew up, kinder, kirk, and kuchen were considered the only proper profession for women. Fortunately for me, my parents had other ideas. Despite their efforts, it was still a narrow provincial life we led, constrained by location, financial hardship, and a world with little access to the outside larger world. So I seemed often to be the dumb kid on the block. For example, the topic of sexuality. In my family, sex was never an outlawed subject. I had already voted before I knew there was a sexual distinction called gay, and ignorance does not necessarily constitute bliss. In New York with my husband, who was attending a specialized legal conference, he wangled my inclusion on a tour of Rikers Island. At that time, it was a prison for offenders up to 3 years. The warden decided I should walk the grounds with him. He thought I was cuter than all those other guys, I think. And when we went by a particular block, he said, that's where we keep the ladies. To which I replied, I thought this was a men's prison. The look of disdain he gave me is still sort of burned into my brain in some faraway place, probably reinforced by my husband's painful, embarrassed explanation that evening. In Bismarck, North Dakota in the 1970s, there were few, if any, rational discussions about that particular sexual preference, but by the 70s, the subject was current in the National UU organization, and a General Assembly ordered the board to set up within administrative headquarters a Gay Affairs Office. The unfortunate label was changed by the board. It seemed somehow not to be what we meant it to say. There was, of course, a heated discussion at the General Assembly about this proposal, and I was on the UUA board at that time, newly on the board, I might add. So I was often baffled when accosted by some irate UU about my impending vote, and dismayed by my own lack of understanding at the heat being generated on the floor of the assembly. The evening before the vote, I was rescued by a young woman who was studying for the UU ministry. Come with me, she ordered, and took me into the suite of offices that the gay community had set up as their headquarters. She remedied my ignorance, introduced me to whoever came into the suite, added some of them to the conversation, all the while explaining what was at stake in the vote scheduled for the morning. I think it qualifies as a crash course. As I remember, I got back to my room at 4 a.m. that morning and had to be at a meeting at 8. It was a crash course, all right. We have, I think, come a long way from those early beginnings, but changing old prejudices and widespread ignorance is not an overnight project, whether it's sex or race or gender or the treatment of the Native Americans in this country. And I want you to think back to the early foundings of this. We were a brand new fellowship, and we weren't very well accepted at that point in the community. They didn't know who we were, and therefore, since we were strange, we were probably dangerous. And they wouldn't allow the minister that came to go to the ministerial council. We were kind of an object of, if not fear, disdain. Well, about that time, they proposed to have a Job Corps set up in Bismarck, which is now where the Native American establishment is. And there was a lot of public concern, and there were a lot of really nasty letters to the editor and decrying such an idea. We didn't want those people coming to our nice, clean town. The letters often suggested organizational moves to prevent such an occurrence. Well, we were, after all, Unitarians. The congregation decided we should speak out. And by a great good fortune, Reverend John Cummins of the First Universalist Church in Minneapolis happened to be our visitor that weekend. He spoke to the congregation and told us we needed to consult all the members on the topic on our becoming publicly in favor of the Job Corps. Because he said that even if some members happened to be opposed to the Job Corps, if they were contacted publicly, they could explain that that was their individual preference, but at the same time acknowledge that the church had voted otherwise. Despite that admonition, and I'm thinking about our involvement with the Native Americans down at Standing Rock, because does that admonition that he gave us still hold, that if we get publicly and officially involved in the protest that's currently in progress? Reverend Cummins' concern was that the congregation not be unhappily and publicly divided. In the days of the Job Corps issue, the community was much more rigid in their opinions of us, I think, and we were unsure of ourselves. I think we've gone way past that. My notion is that we've grown way past that. But we do need to keep in mind that when we speak for the fellowship, we need to speak for the fellowship. And we weathered that storm very well. And in fact, they did bring a Job Corps to Bismarck. And as I remember, one of the members of our fellowship was a counselor out there, and he said, we've just started a choir. Now, most of the people that they sent up here, in the great wisdom of the government, were young black men from rural areas in the South, a lot of them from Alabama. And to send them to North Dakota to enjoy our lovely winter, I thought was a little daring. Anyway, so he brought the choir. He said, you're all so nice and pleasant. They need a little practice of appearing before people because none of them have ever done anything like that before. So there were, I think, about 10 black kids and one white kid. And they stood up, they sang for us, and they were really very good, and we all smiled, and most of us took somebody home for dinner. But on the way home, as he put them in the bus, and they drove back out to where they lived, one of them said to him, "That's church?" I hope we hadn't just had one of those great discussions about the new waterworks in Bismarck or something. If you look at the statement of our covenant on the back of this morning's program, either of the issues that I was talking about fall into several categories. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregation and in societies at large. Amazing, isn't it, when you take those statements and apply them to a current local issue? It is precisely those principles which can provide the common ground to bring more seekers to our religious home, to ours. I'm aware that by serving first on the district board and then on the national board, I had a rare glimpse into many aspects of the Unitarian Universalist world, even if it sometimes turned into a crash course. Because the Western District of Canada at that time was in the Prairie Star District, I went to their meetings too, since I represented them. And the first one was included in the National Canadian Unitarian Universalist meeting. Talk about the innocent abroad. I learned, first of all, how much animosity there was against the United States. They resented our domination of the marketplace, how much what we did affected them, and they had no vote in that their future was tied so tightly to ours without the democratic process being included. And so there was some who resented my presence because I was not Canadian. I was one of those Americans that they so disliked. In addition, they were involved in a noisy battle on the convention floor over the Quebec issue. Remember the one about speaking French? And a very angry, obstreperous man from Montreal dominated the floor arguments, and his anger sort of permeated the proceedings. He was one of the ones who informed me of the evils of my American ways. I wouldn't call it a baptism by fire, but I came home a little singed and clearly uncertain about my role in that particular Unitarian world. The Western District was a different experience, however, and I recaptured my opinion that we embrace the same religious outlook, whether we live in Bismarck or Calgary or Winnipeg. The Western District, of course, has since been accepted into the Canadian organization and is no longer involved in our district. If I am lapsing into shop talk, it's because I would like to encourage all of you to take a look at that bigger Unitarian Universalist world out there. If you get a chance to serve on a district committee, jump on it. When you travel, seek out the UU churches because many of them have history lessons not publicized elsewhere. I mean, who knows among you the two Adams presidents, John Adams and John Quincy Adams, and their spouses have their tombs in the basement of the Unitarian Church at Quincy, Massachusetts. And I once knew somebody who grew up in that church, and she said that was where they went on Halloween, down in the tombs. The first Unitarian church in San Francisco was founded by Thomas Starr King, who was credited with saving California for the Union when the Civil War broke out, and whose statue represented California in the statutory hall of the U.S. Capitol, until recently, when the Republicans of California replaced him with Ronald Reagan, to the annoyance of a lot of Unitarians. One of the hazards, however, of a small UU fellowship located in what has been considered until the recent oil boom as the middle of nowhere is a sense of religious isolation, a notion now considerably reduced by the internet. But still, there's a wonderful sense of belonging when you join your voice with 3,000 others at a General Assembly, or attend a Sunday service far from home and find yourself as much at ease there as you are here. Richard Grigg, a Unitarian and professor of philosophy and religion, wrote a treatise back in 2004 entitled To Re-Enchant the World. He points to the increasing unchurched status of people in our world, in part because the old beliefs don't match up in a useful and satisfactory manner in the modern world. Solution? Skip church, take a yoga class, play golf, schedule a business meeting. The professor points out that what is taking the place of that old-time religion is secularism and spirituality. But what if neither of these fills the seeker's need for a religious experience? By Professor Grigg's reckoning, we, the Unitarian Universalists, are the ideal place for such seekers, provided we remain an organization in welcoming all comers, with the qualifying provision that they agree to our stated principles. If we do, in a world fast choosing secularism, we may, in the professor's world, re-enchant the world. Now, because I have the power and because I know it's getting late, I'm going to hurry. But I'm going to read you a little piece of what I took out of the readings this morning to do the one about September. This is of Liberal Churches. It's titled, it's by an old friend of mine whose name, of course, has dropped right out of my head. Clark Dewey Wells. He was a minister in the end in Florida and was a good friend of mine. He says the liberal church is a place to learn, to grow, to sing, to stand, a place to be a more authentic self, a place to encounter, reckon, judge, accept, and be accepted, a place to be challenged by new insight and be reminded of what you already know, a place to respond to a vision of holiness, all arts, and other depths, a place to be with others in co-creating with God, a place to provide conditions for the coursing of that creativity that vivifies, heals, and makes all things new, a place to go where you know where you belong. This is the liberal church. The closing words this morning are from Jean Rowe. We have a calling in this world. We are called to honor diversity, to respect differences with dignity, and to challenge those who would forbid it. We are the people of a wide path. Let us be wide in affection and go our way in peace.